Tim Burton is one of the masters of stop-motion animation and is the king of creepy. He is known for making films that are both dark yet somehow instant classics. In 1993, he made what is probably considered his most popular film to date, The Nightmare Before Christmas. This holiday-infested stop-motion experience follows the story of Jack Skellington the Pumpkin King as he struggles to deal with the same old things year after year. But everything changed for Jack when he stumbled upon a series of doors that seemingly led to other realms and worlds. He found himself falling into Christmastown and immediately fell in love. The movie follows him and his journey to bring Christmas to Halloween Town and to see himself become the new Santa Claus. Throughout the movie, Jack has a lot of friends and most of them do what he asks with no question, but he luckily does have one person in his ear who is always honest with him, his beloved Sally. Sally is a woman who has limbs that she is able to remove and sew back on at will. This comes in handy for her anytime she finds herself in a sticky situation. It's made clear right away that Sally has feelings for Jack and she's always looking out for his best interest. Perhaps that's why she was the only one warning him of the horrible things that might happen should he meddle in something he knows very little about. Either way, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas was filled with a cast of lovable, quirky characters that have led to countless fan theories over the years. In fact, one of those theories actually connects it to another creepier theory out, specifically looking at Sally. Many are familiar with the theory that explores the past lives of all the inhabitants of Halloween Town and how they all died. It not only explains the manner in which all of them perished, but also gives us some insight into who they were as people before they passed on. Not only that, but the theory also points at a very creepy connection that Sally shares with another one of Tim Burton's films, specifically his first stop-motion short, Vincent. As it would turn out, Tim Burton created Sally as his reincarnated wife, with some pretty disturbing facts surrounding her death. Now, before we get into Sally's connection to Vincent, let's take a quick look at the theory that states how all of the characters in Halloween Town died. For those of you who are familiar with the characters, you know that each one has its own weird physical appearance that makes it unique and different from the other characters. Whether it be the mayor and his mood-shifting spinning head, or Sally and her detachable limbs, everyone has something that makes them different from the next. But what if we told you that, much like the case in most of Tim Burton's movies, there's actually a much darker meaning behind everyone's uniqueness? Well, as it turns out, each one of those quirks that makes them unique is actually a hint as to what happened to them in their past lives. For instance, let's take a look at Jack. You know, the Pumpkin King. Well, when he's not acting as a scarecrow and all decked out, he's actually just a skeleton who happens to be dressed quite dapper. At the beginning of the film, we can see him making his way through the town before he allows himself to be engulfed in flames, only to reveal his true self. Well, have you ever wondered why his body lit up in flames as quickly as it did? Even for being something that's supposed to be made out of straw, he just seemed to ignite with no problem, and that's typically not how fire works. Well, some believe this is an homage to the fact that in his past life, Jack was likely burned alive to the point where all that was left was a skeleton. Another group to take a look at that is pretty eye-opening to this theory are the evil, impish henchmen of Oogie Boogie. That's right, Lock, Shock, and Barrel. When you look at Lock, one of the first noticeable things about him is his bright blue lips, which are typically a sign of someone who died from hypothermia or freezing to death. Barrel, on the other hand, had a green shade to his lips, which, if you don't know, is something that happens when you drown. But the saddest one of the trio is Shock. When you look at her lips, you can see that there is no color to them. They are basically just pale. This is leading some people to believe that she may have died from a lack of oxygen or smoke inhalation, like from a fire. As for their master, Oogie Boogie, it looks like there are clues everywhere as to how he came to meet his end in his past life. I mean, when you look at him, what is he? He's just a large burlap sack that's been stitched together and stuffed with creepy crawlies, right? This has led a lot of fans to think that upon his death, he was actually skinned, with the rest of his body being left in the ground to be devoured by the insects that have now come together to make up his internal body. And with insects the size that he was, a tightly sewn burlap sack would have no problem containing them. This would be the only way for him to maintain an almost human-like shape to his body as he spent the rest of his days being a menace to Halloween Town. How crazy is that? I mean, it seems really clear that a lot of the inhabitants of Halloween Town give off clear indications as to what happened to them in life. And with a little bit of digging, some of the answers end up seeming really accurate and being pretty creepy. There's one character that we haven't mentioned yet whose backstory seemed simple at first, but the deeper we dug, the more compelling it got. and that character, of course, is Sally. Things get really interesting when we start looking into Sally's backstory and what terrible fate may have befallen her that resulted in her untimely demise. And the more we discuss the evidence, the easier it is to see how fans came up with the original theory as to how she died. You see, many fans believe that in her past life, Sally was actually a witch, and upon being discovered or suspected of dabbling in witchcraft, she was met with a barbaric death, dismemberment. I mean, there are signs throughout the entire movie that helped point many fans to this assumption. Think about it. Sally has always been a very enchanting character, from her apparent awareness of everything around her to the fact that she can see premonitions of the future. It all makes her seem very mystifying. There are even a few points in the film where it looks like the wind is speaking to her as it gently blows through her hair. Or do you remember when she was making soup for Dr. Finkelstein? She clearly knows her way around alchemy and potions, as if she's able to make a cocktail that will literally knock out the dead. She was also the first one in the film to mention what terrible things Jack's new obsession with Christmas would bring, and she was pretty spot on. And when she envisioned that beautifully decorated tree burning, she literally saw the future. What's really cool about Sally is that without a second thought, she felt something was wrong and went to warn people. Jack may not have listened to her, but she still tried her best to stop the disaster from happening. Now, all of this evidence of her being able to see into the future and receive visions or messages from nature all make a pretty good case that during her days among the living, Sally was likely into witchcraft. And do you know what would happen to you if you were discovered or suspected of being a witch back in the day? It would likely end in a horrible death. Though they may have had many different methods of dealing with suspected witches, one of the most popular next to burning them alive at the stake was the act of dismemberment. This, of course, would explain why Sally was so comfortable removing and reattaching her limbs to suit her needs. But this is just the start of Sally's backstory. In fact, what happened to Sally may have ended up being even a bit more twisted than her being dismembered for being a witch. Now, you obviously know who Tim Burton is, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this. But did you know that his career in stop-motion animation started long before his work on The Nightmare Before Christmas? In fact, one of his works from 1982, a short film titled Vincent, is one that came out 11 years before Nightmare did, and when you watch it, you can clearly see the influence that it had on his other bigger films. Vincent was a stop-motion short that's narrated through poetry. It's about 6.5 minutes long and follows a young boy named Vincent Malloy. Vincent wasn't like your average child and often found himself dabbling in the dark and creepy. He aspired to be like Vincent Price, the man who actually narrated the short film, and spends his days doing wonky experiments and reading Edgar Allan Poe. He had an obsession with turning his family dog, Abercrombie, into a ravenous zombie, and he was also fairly detached from the real world. Vincent Mind was like his own little workshop that was heavily influenced by Poe's writings. Throughout the short, Vincent ended up becoming so deluded from reality that he even began to think he himself was a mad scientist, and to make matters worse, he believed that he had buried his wife alive when in reality, he was just a 7-year-old boy. Towards the end of the film, he began to show the same signs of madness that were depicted in Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and it even ended with him collapsing to the floor, quoting The Raven, all while Vincent believed himself to be dead. The entire short is phenomenal and is certainly worth checking out, especially if you find this next part interesting. Our next question, though, is what did any of that have to do with Sally's backstory? Well, it's come to some fans' attention that Sally may have actually been the reincarnated wife of Vincent. I mean, when you think about it, it fits perfectly. Throughout Tim Burton's first stop-motion short, we learn that Vincent 100% believed that he killed his wife and buried her, to which he responded by trying to dig her up to revive her or even rebuild her if he had to. This could even support the witchcraft theory as well. Remember, even though Vincent suffered from delusions, he could still have dug up a body and tried to revive it, meaning that his, quote, wife would have been some random woman that he found in a grave. That random woman could have also been a witch in her previous life as well, for all we know. This means that Vincent was just rebuilding an already dismembered corpse that had been previously prosecuted and tortured in her previous life. It probably supports the reason why her limbs are so removable and mismatched in Halloween Town as well. Not only were they removed from witchcraft, but now we have Vincent experimenting on her, and in a botched attempt to rebuild her, he hastily threw her limbs together, giving them the appearance of being mismatched, much like they look in The Nightmare Before Christmas. And of course, Vincent failed at bringing this dead corpse back from the dead. Thus, Sally was reborn among the others who reside in Halloween Town. Only instead of being one piece, she was reborn as a ragdoll who is feeling the pain of unrequited love. That was until she met Jack, whom she ended up growing quite fond of and very close to. It's an interesting theory to connect another, and taking a step back to look at the entire timeline as a whole, it is totally plausible. Sally clearly has some patterns with her past lives, with them even bleeding into her current reality in Halloween Town, where she has Dr. Finkelstein doing some crazy things to her too. It doesn't seem like she can catch a break with people torturing her body despite her being alive or dead. Tim Burton is one of the masters at stop-motion animation and is a director that is hard to top. Almost every film he comes out with is an instant classic, and it's always nice to see those worlds intertwine with one another. If you haven't had a chance to check out his 1982 short Vincent, we highly recommend it. And if you end up watching it, be sure to let us know what you think about the possible connection between Vincent and The Nightmare Before Christmas. That's all, Disney fans. Let us know what video you'd like to see next in the comments, and like and subscribe for more magically packed videos.